2008, the lights at Rolling Acres Mall in Akron, Ohio went out. Not because the building had closed, because nobody had paid the electric bill in 7 months. That's not how giant American shopping malls were supposed to die. They were supposed to keep selling Cinnabon and Orange Julius forever. They were supposed to be the Saturday afternoon, the prom dress, the first job, the place you went when there was nowhere else to go. But starting around the turn of the millennium, something began to happen to these buildings. Slowly at first, then catastrophically. And what's quietly rising up in their place is the strangest real estate comeback story of the 21st century. Stay with me, because the second half of this story is stranger than the first. Over the next half hour, we're going to trace what actually happens when a giant American shopping mall dies. Not the headlines about Sears or JCPenney pulling out, the buildings themselves. The 800,000 square feet of dark linoleum, the dry fountains, the silent escalators that still hum because nobody has flipped the breaker. We'll look at the specific corpses: Rolling Acres in Akron, Dixie Square in suburban Chicago, Cloverleaf outside Richmond. We'll look at why they died, how quickly, and who or what killed them. Then we'll look at what's growing back in the wreckage. Community colleges where the food courts used to be, apartment complexes where the parking lots once stretched, mega churches inside the old anchor stores. And finally, we'll talk about what was actually lost when the malls went dark, and whether anything we've built since can take its place. It's a longer story than people think. Before we go any further, if you've ever driven past one of those husked-out malls and wondered what happened, a quick like genuinely helps this find the next person asking that same question. And drop a memory in the comments. The mall you used to wander through, the one near where you grew up, or the one in your town sitting empty right now. Don't be shy. Those stories are half the reason this matters. Subscribe if you want more like this one. Now let's talk about what was actually lost when those lights went out. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General issued a formal advisory declaring loneliness a public health epidemic. As serious, the advisory said, as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The numbers behind that advisory are worth holding on to for the rest of this video. A 2025 study in the American Journal of Preventative Medicine found that nearly 40% of American adults now report moderate to severe loneliness. In a separate 2024 survey, 17% of Americans said they had 0 friends. Not few friends. Not drifted from friends. 0. In 1990, that number was 1%. There are a lot of explanations for that collapse. The pandemic, smartphones, suburban sprawl, the disappearance of bowling leagues and bridge clubs and Elks lodges. But there's one explanation that doesn't get talked about as much, because it sounds like nostalgia. For about 30 years, roughly 1970 to 2000, there was a kind of building that ordinary Americans treated as a public square. It was free to enter. It was climate controlled. It had benches, fountains, food, books, music, and other human beings just sort of walking around, looking at things. If you were 15 and bored, you went there. If you were 80 and your spouse had died, you went there for the walking laps. If you had nothing to do on a Tuesday afternoon, you knew where to find people doing nothing. Which means to understand what we lost, we have to first understand what the mall actually was. The first enclosed shopping mall in America opened on October 8, 1956, in Edina, Minnesota, just outside Minneapolis. It was called Southdale Center,
I've never seen anything
and it was designed by a Viennese architect named Victor Gruen. This is the part of the story that has to be told carefully, because almost everyone, including the executives who later built thousands more malls, got Gruen wrong. Gruen wasn't trying to invent a shopping center. He was trying to invent a town. He'd grown up in Vienna, where the heart of every neighborhood was an open piazza, a place where children played and old men argued politics and married couples walked nowhere in particular, just to be seen. When he immigrated to America in the late 1930s, he saw a country building enormous houses, enormous lawns, enormous cars, and no piazzas, no town squares. No place where strangers were simply expected to share air. So Southdale wasn't designed as a retail box. It was designed as a substitute town center, complete with a sky-lit central court, a fish pond, a cage of finches, sculpture, fountains, and free seating. Gruen later said he wanted Americans to have the same dignity of public space that working-class Europeans took for granted. He hated cars. He hated parking lots. He once described the parking ring Southdale was forced to sit inside of as land-wasting seas of asphalt. The Americans who copied his idea ignored almost everything he tried to say. They kept the climate control. They kept the central court. They kept the bench seating, and they dropped almost everything else. By 1990, the United States had nearly 2,500 enclosed shopping malls, almost all of them surrounded by the parking lot seas Gruen had despised. But here's the thing, even in their botched, suburbanized, deeply commercial form, the malls accidentally pulled off most of what Gruen had wanted. They became, for 30 years, the only large indoor public-ish spaces in the average American suburb. They were where teenagers had their first chaperone-free conversations, where retirees did their morning power walks, where you ran into your second-grade teacher buying socks, where, if you had no plan, you went anyway. In 1989, 3 decades after Southdale opened, an American sociologist named Ray Oldenburg published a book called The Great Good Place. In it, he gave that kind of space a name. The first place, he said, was home. The second place was work. And then there was a third place, the cafe, the diner, the barbershop, the bookstore, the tavern, the church social hall. A free or near-free space outside of home and work where regular people built informal community. Oldenburg argued that the third place was where democracies actually held together. Without third places, he wrote, individuals atomize. Strangers stop becoming neighbors. The civic muscle weakens. He didn't list them all on his list of true third places. He thought it was too commercial, too disorienting, too privately owned. But the mall was, for many Americans, especially teenagers, single elderly people, immigrants, anyone without a tavern or a church or a corner cafe nearby, the closest thing they had. And for about 30 years, it worked. Then it didn't. Several things happened to the American shopping mall at once. The first crack was 2008. The financial crisis didn't just close stores, it closed the kind of stores malls depended on. Anchor tenants like Mervyn's, Linens and Things, and Circuit City folded entirely. Mid-tier chains like JCPenney, Sears, and Macy's started a contraction that would eat the next 15 years. The malls themselves operated on a financial model that required 4 big anchor department stores at the corners to draw foot traffic to the smaller shops in between. When the anchors started dropping, the smaller shops bled out within months. The second crack was Amazon. Online retail was already growing in the 2000s, but the convenience tipping point arrived in the early 2010s with Prime 2-day shipping. By the late 2010s, you could get a pair of socks delivered to your door in less time than it took to drive to the mall. In-store shopping in the United States has declined by about 62% over the past decade, while online shopping has grown 111%. The mall's central economic engine, the impulse buy on a Saturday afternoon, was being routed around. The third crack was COVID. The 2020 pandemic emptied every mall in America simultaneously for months. Some never reopened. The chains that survived emerged smaller, more cautious, and more committed to closing underperforming stores. The post-pandemic recovery never quite reached the mid-tier mall. By 2024, store closures in the United States ticked up to about 7,000. And then 2025 happened. In a single year, over 15,000 American brick-and-mortar stores are expected to close, more than double the previous year. The retail sector lost 75,800 jobs in the first 5 months of 2025 alone, a 274% increase from the same period the year before. Indoor mall vacancy rates jumped from 5% to 9% in 12 months. 6 million more square feet were vacated than were occupied in the first half of the year. The big picture. As of April 2025, the United States had roughly 1,200 enclosed shopping malls left. By 2028, that number is projected to fall to around 900. Some analysts estimate that 87% of large American shopping malls, nearly 9 out of 10, could shut down within the next decade. And the deaths are not gentle. Rolling Acres in Akron, where this story started, lost its lights in 2008, then sat dark for nearly a decade while looters stripped the copper wiring. In 2011, a man was electrocuted trying to do exactly that. Dixie Square Mall in Harvey, Illinois closed in 1978 after only 12 years of operation. It was used as a filming location for the Blues Brothers in 1980, then left to rot for 34 years, the site of multiple violent crimes and arson attacks, before the city finally tore it down in 2012. Cloverleaf Mall outside Richmond, Virginia limped along until a 1996 robbery left $2 store employees dead in the stockroom. Foot traffic collapsed almost overnight, and the building was demolished in 2008. So what happens to the buildings? The answer turns out to be one of the strangest real estate stories in modern American history. The first thing to understand is that a dead mall is enormous. The average American mall is around 800,000 square feet, roughly 14 football fields under one roof, surrounded by another 20 football fields of parking. You can't just hire a guy with a wrecking ball. Demolition alone can cost tens of millions of dollars, which is why so many dead malls just sit there for years, sometimes decades, after their last tenant leaves. But when something does happen to a dead mall, and increasingly something is happening, the patterns are wild. The simplest fate is demolition, followed by big box redevelopment. Rolling Acres. The Akron Mall we opened with sat abandoned for almost a decade, then was bulldozed by the city starting in October 2016. The land was purchased by Amazon, which broke ground on an enormous fulfillment center on the site in December 2019. Hold that image for a moment. The same Rolling Acres parking lot that emptied out in 2008 because shoppers stopped coming, because Amazon's same-day shipping had made the trip pointless. That same parking lot is now an Amazon fulfillment center. The company that killed the mall is now occupying its grave. The second fate is the one urban planners get most excited about: adaptive reuse. In Austin, Texas, the Highland Mall sat half empty by the early 2010s. Rather than demolish it, Austin Community College bought the entire site and converted it, anchor stores and all, into a full college campus. The old JCPenney is now a learning lab. The food court is a study commons. Where the central fountain used to be, there's an enrollment office. As of 2025, it serves tens of thousands of students. In Burlington, Vermont, a failing downtown mall was reimagined as a mixed-use neighborhood center. Apartments above, medical clinics on the ground floor, offices and shared community space woven between them. In other cities, the same model is producing housing on the former parking lots. Apartment buildings constructed where the asphalt used to be, and converting the mall interior itself into mixed-use blocks. The math here is more interesting than it sounds. Adaptive reuse reduces a project's carbon emissions by as much as 70% compared to demolish and rebuild. It salvages roughly 90% of the existing materials. And in a country facing a structural shortage of about 4 million housing units, the largest single source of underused interior space sitting empty in American suburbs is precisely the dead mall. A third fate is more spiritual and more American. Megachurches have been quietly buying up dead anchor stores and even whole dying malls since the early 2000s. The big box anchor footprint, high ceilings, parking on all four sides, climate control, easy highway access is almost exactly the footprint of a 5,000-seat evangelical worship space. In some cases, the entire interior corridor of a mall has been converted into Sunday school classrooms, a coffee shop, a youth center, and a multi-screen sermon room. The mall is gone. The building keeps showing up to work. There are stranger reuses. Indoor farms have moved into anchor wings. Vertical stack hydroponic farms growing lettuce inside what used to be a Sears garden center. Pickleball complexes have leased entire dead malls and turned them into 20-court tournament venues. Trampoline parks, indoor skydiving facilities, esports arenas, doctors' offices, dialysis clinics. The dead American shopping mall, it turns out, is the most versatile building stock in the country. Almost anything fits inside it. Some malls don't fully die. They go into what real estate analysts have started calling the zombie phase. Technically open, technically operational, but with occupancy rates below 30%. The mall is still there. The food court is still there. The escalators still run. But 3 out of every 4 storefronts are dark, papered over with brown butcher paper or sad pop-up shops. And the only consistent foot traffic comes from the mall-walking retirees who show up at 7 a.m. to do laps around the empty corridors. There are hundreds of these zombie malls scattered across the United States in 2025. Buildings that aren't dead, but aren't alive either, kept open by inertia and the property tax math of whichever owner is still nominally on the deed. The zombie malls have generated their own subculture. A website called deadmalls.com, which has been documenting these spaces since the early 2000s, has hundreds of entries written by amateur urban historians, each with a photo gallery, a closing timeline, and a brief eulogy. Urban explorers, sometimes called urbex photographers, sneak into the fully abandoned ones with cameras to document the half-lit corridors before demolition. There's an entire aesthetic genre on social media, sometimes called liminal space, built around the eerie feeling of an empty American mall at 11 a.m. On a weekday, fluorescent lights humming, a single Yankee Candle store somehow still open. The malls have, in death, become a kind of cultural memorial. People who grew up in the 80s and 90s post photos of the food court fountains they remember from kindergarten. People who never knew them post photos of the way the light falls through a dirty skylight onto a closed Hot Topic. But here's the part the architecture press doesn't usually cover. While the physical buildings are getting their second lives, the function the mall used to serve, that accidental third-place duty, has been splintering across town into 100 different places. The biggest surprise of the 2020s is pickleball. The sport barely existed at scale a decade ago. By 2025, it's the fastest-growing sport in the country, with more than 70% of its players between the ages of 18 and 44. That's not a retirement village statistic. That's millennials and Gen Z showing up 4 nights a week at neighborhood courts where, crucially, you cannot play alone. The court is too small. You have to find 3 other people. Pickleball clubs have become accidental friend factories. Coffee shops have followed a similar arc. In Texas, an entrepreneur started a daytime social event series that combined morning coffee with structured activities, meditation, board games, language exchange. The first event drew about 400 people. 4 months later, A single morning drew 2,000. Similar event series coffee shops have launched in nearly every major American metro since 2024. The model is simple. The coffee is the excuse. The structure is the point. People who would never walk into a bar alone will walk into a structured coffee morning alone. Run clubs are another piece of it. The Tuesday night run club model. A free meetup at a brewery or coffee shop, 3 miles at a conversational pace, beers and pizza after, has spread to almost every mid-sized American city since 2022. Some clubs have grown from 12 members at their first meet to 400 regulars showing up every week. Strava data suggests group runs in major American metros have roughly doubled in volume in the past 3 years. So are book clubs. So are Dungeons and Dragons nights at brewery tap rooms. So are the open mat sessions at jiu-jitsu gyms. So are bouldering nights at climbing gyms, where the wall is the excuse and the chalk-stained couch in the corner is the point. None of these are new, exactly. What's new is the volume. The sheer number of small, scheduled, semi-public gatherings that have flooded into American towns since the loneliness epidemic became impossible to ignore. There's a phrase that's gained traction among urbanists since 2024. The third place isn't a place anymore. It's a calendar. The cafe matters less than the regular Tuesday morning the cafe runs an event. The brewery matters less than the run club that meets in its parking lot every Wednesday at 6. The gym matters less than the standing 6 a.m. CrossFit class, where the same 12 people show up every weekday and notice when someone is missing. The new third place is not a permanent location you drop into. It's a recurring time you commit to. This is a big shift from the mall. The mall didn't ask anything of you. You could show up alone, on no schedule, and wander. And that was enough. The new third places require you to opt in. They require you to commit to a time. They require you to know a few names. The bar to entry is higher, but the relationships are deeper, and quietly, almost invisibly, the most successful new third place in America may be the one nobody wrote a book about. Public libraries.
I told you it would be.
The same libraries everyone assumed were obsolete in the iPhone era have become, in the past 5 years, some of the busiest community centers in the country. Free co-working, free meeting rooms, free children's events, free language exchange, free maker spaces and 3D printers and seed libraries, free tax help in April, free Wi-Fi in neighborhoods where Wi-Fi is the difference between getting a job and not getting a job. They were always there. We just didn't notice them until the mall stopped picking up. In some cities, library foot traffic is now higher than it was in the pre-pandemic peak. Branches that almost closed in the 2010s for budget reasons are now being expanded, with civic budgets quietly being shifted from policing or roads into branch hours. The American Library, that quietly socialist institution that no political faction quite wants to fight about, turned out to be the most resilient third place we had, which leaves us with the real question. The one neither Gruen nor Oldenburg saw coming. The mall didn't die because we stopped needing a place to gather. It died because we stopped needing that particular compromise. A commercial space pretending to be a public one. A privately owned simulacrum of a town square, where the rent on the shoe store paid for the bench you sat on, and the air conditioning, and the fountain you tossed a quarter into when you were 8 years old. That compromise was always fragile. The minute the shoe store stopped paying, the bench went away. The minute the anchor pulled out, the lights followed. The mall could only be public for as long as it was commercially profitable, and the second the math broke, so did the public square. What's emerging in its place is something different, smaller, more fragmented, more deliberate. Pickleball courts where you have to know 3 other people's names by the end of the night. Coffee shops that schedule events because the regulars asked for them. Libraries that have quietly become the most used civic buildings in every American county. Mega churches built inside the ribcage of dead anchor stores. Run clubs that meet at 6 in the morning on Tuesdays, because that's just when you go. Each of these is honest about what it is. A pickleball club is a pickleball club. A coffee shop is a coffee shop. A library is a library. None of them pretend to be a town square. And yet all of them are doing the work the malls used to do by accident, 3 nights a week, 15 people at a time. Victor Gruen, the Viennese architect who built the first mall in 1956 trying to give America a town center, died in 1980, the same year Dixie Square Mall was abandoned. He had spent his final decade telling anyone who would listen that he hated what his idea had become. The shopping centers, he wrote, had betrayed his original concept. He was right. But he was also wrong about what would come next, because Gruen got the town square he wanted in the end, just not where he put it. He got it in 1,000 smaller pieces, spread across the country at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, where strangers learn each other's names because they had to find 3 other people to play. The malls are dying. The third place isn't. It just had to go find a new home.